Wonderful's Scale or Fail series has been developed with business growth in mind. We're hosting a series of webinars and a special event at Google Campus as part of London Tech Week, exploring the ways in which startups can grow their business through creative brand, tech and marketing strategies. Featuring vital insight from our experienced team, alongside panel and webinar guests including CEOs of fast growth companies, CMOs, investors and entrepreneurs, we'll be offering an unrivaled look under the hood of successful scale-up businesses. In our first webinar, Wonderful's MD Dan Mordub and Creative Director Philip Hansen discuss why Wonderful are running the Scale or Fail project and what the market context is surrounding this topic.
Hi, good afternoon everyone. Dan here and Phil here from Wonderful Creative. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. We have got loads of content to go through with you in the next 20 minutes. Hope you're all well. We're just going to give ourselves 1 minute or 30 seconds because we know we've got a few more people joining. We can see people are literally joining all the time. So give us a couple of seconds and then we are going to start. Great. When we get cracking, we're gonna screen share very shortly, and obviously the webinar is being recorded. And if you do want a copy of the slides or the deck, we're more than happy to share those with you. Ping us an email at the end with the contact details at the end, and then we'll share the deck and we'll share the podcast with you accordingly. We're going to get cracking, so we're just going to get straight into the presentation. As I said, we've got a lot. We want to get through in about 15 minutes. And then we may or may not have time for Q&As. Usually we don't because we've got a lot to get through. If we don't and you want to connect afterwards because you've got any questions, again, please email us and please come back to us with any questions you've got. These things are always hard because we've got lots of people on there. We've got lots of people asking questions. So we want to go quickly and we're going to get stuck into some of the meat now. So I'm just going to share screen. Bear with me 2 seconds. Right, great. So for those that we don't know, obviously there's lots of different people signed up today. Just a quick introduction about Wonderful. We're not here to talk about us. We're here to talk about some sort of principles and things we've seen around the whole startup community and infrastructure scaling or failing. We do a lot of work with fast growth startups, both from seed through to venture, through to sale. And over the last few years, we've realized there's a lot of common pitfalls we've seen, a lot of things that we've seen that do work, don't work. And I think rather than just lecture at you for the next few series, what we want to do is we actually want to interview companies, we want to interview CEOs of startups, investors, IP lawyers. We've got a really, really, really good mix of people that we're going to interview over the next few weeks, every 2 weeks on a Thursday, and get some real life stories, first-hand stories of things that they've seen work when they're scaling, things that they've seen haven't worked, things that have really gone well, and things that haven't gone well. A lot of this series came out of our engagements with investors directly. We do a lot of partnership work with angels, seed, VCs, PE houses, and we do a lot of work directly with those guys, and we ask them questions, what is it looking for when you invest? What's working, what's not working? What are some of the common mistakes, some of the common pitfalls? So we want to get those across to you guys over the next few weeks. As you can see on the screen, our client base is fairly diverse, both B2C and B2B. Not all of our clients are startups. We do a lot of work as well with global brands and larger organizations. And so it's really good for us to get a perspective on where the startup community is at. And particularly when a brand is looking to scale, how does it move from that testing phase into sort of sustainability and scaling phase? So let's just quickly crack on. You can see some of our clients there. Again, as I said, a really, really broad brush. Some of those startups you might know. There's quite a few tech startups in there. There's some B2C startups in there, as well as more established brands. So into Scale or Fail. So I'll just hand over to Philip.
So as Dan kind of explained, what we're trying to do here is actually, rather than just sort of analysing, our sector or the different the marketplace, or try and get some insight around some of the activities that we do. What we're trying to understand is why in the startup scene we're seeing the companies that thrive and flourish, and why the ones that aren't going in that direction, what's happening there. So a couple of stats here. So there was 11,800 tech startups in 2018. So basically what this means, and I'm not going to go through all these stats now, but basically what these stats mean is that you've got more and more competitors, and that what we're finding is that even the startups are finding themselves in quite established markets immediately, and even those that have created cut through quite early or have got some kind of disruptor brand are suddenly finding themselves in a position where they've got a developed competitor set that they're having to kind of go toe to toe with. So the UK specifically is drawing more funding, more VC funding than anywhere else in Europe. With that 5 billion, what that's creating again is this ecosystem where very quickly businesses and startup products are finding that they need to kind of find a way to kind of stand out amongst their competition. So that's the one side of it. We're in a super healthy environment for, in terms of funding and the amount of ideas and kind of new businesses forming. But the other side of it, and kind of what we're actually quite interested in here, is that the kind of top level figure that I'm sure we've all heard is 90% of startups fail. So, we all know that, it's a really broad category, startup. So, you've got everything in the mix there. But even when we sort of file that down to just funded startups, so those businesses that have achieved funding, that 29% of those still fail. So, these are businesses that have been through sort of due diligence, have been through a process and have kind of pitched and won that kind of investment, but still there's that sort of nearly 30% failure rate. So when we kind of look at what success means in respect to the failure, so success is when a startup has gone through more than one round of funding and has eventually exited through an IPO or an acquisition. So only 18% of startups and scale-ups have gone through that process. So, one of the things we want to do with this series and with how trying to understand the kind of the factors involved here is why why are we seeing such a small number of those scale ups sort of go through to that kind of final phase. So we've got a few things to walk you through today around that. And I think we want to give you a real top level view today, because we've got several activities out the back of this which will go in a bit more depth and give a bit more insight to specific examples. But today we want to look at that kind of, what is the model that we're looking at in terms of, the journey that a startup or a scale up should expect, and then also some of the things we found with our own clients.
Yeah, so very quickly, we just want to show you a couple of models and a couple of growth curves that are both industry wide, but also we see very specifically with the clients we work with. And we could talk through these growth curves and these models for a long time, but as Phil said, today we're going to keep it quite top line. Obviously, when we're working with clients, we go through this in a lot more detail. But I think one of those is looking at a market curve, and if you can see the axes, and you've got sort of real and perceived size of market over time. So again, we're going to keep this very, very quick for now, but often we get clients that come to us and say, right, we've got a real disruptor here, we've got a real innovator, there's no one in the market doing this, there's nothing out there like it. And there's a real sense of hype cycle, and that ends with a sort of perceived market opportunity. And obviously that's where the first round of funding generally happens. So we're going in there, selling a dream, selling a vision, selling a disruptive piece of technology, a disruptive or an innovative piece of technology, something that's going to change the way people behave, the way people do things, the way people consume things. And there's a real sense of hype and excitement around it. All of that is built on perceived market opportunity. And I think sometimes with CEOs and C-suite decision makers of startups, often they perceive the opportunity as reality. And then unfortunately, or the reality of business, is reality hits. So you launch products, get into the market, and then often there's a growth curve to go through, which we'll look at in the next set of slides. And at this stage, often is where the failure happens as well. It's where the technology, the service hasn't broken through into that market, hasn't created a new category or elevated the category. It hasn't actually achieved what was said in the hype cycle. Obviously, again, that's where there's the next round of funding that often kicks in, and then the reality between what the perceived market opportunity is and the real market opportunity is the ability to scale. It's the ability to prove a model, to deliver that model and scale that model. So if we look at things like Amazon and how their stock price over from 98 to 2012, obviously if we extrapolate that to 2019, it's even more, the growth is even on a steeper curve. But if you look at where they started in 98 from the hype cycle and the years of them testing the product, building a model, refining the technology, owning that category, changing the way consumers purchase, changing their mindsets. You know, there was a long time from sort of around 2000 to 2007 where they were going through that growth curve. And then since 2007, you can see that they've achieved the ultimate liftoff. They've achieved the market opportunity. It's now sustainable. It's now created the category. It's now created the market, and they can kick on from there. Amazon obviously are a good example because we've got time data and we all know what they now achieve in the marketplace. So what does that mean for a sort of a startup as an individual company? And this is where we get caught up with clients all the time. And this is where there's so many pitfalls and so many intricacies and nuances that we need to understand as a startup organization. So I want to just show you the J curve, which is not something we came up with, unfortunately, but it is so key to many of our clients. So Howard Love came up with this a few years ago and does a lot of work with Startup Grind, and fantastic model. And obviously you've got the value over time here. So ultimately, over time, we want our businesses to increase in value until we get to stage 6. We often get briefs at stage 1, whether it's a brand new startup or whether it's more of a corporate brand that wants to innovate, that wants to create a new product, that wants to create new services. And at this phase, this again is the exciting phase. This is the phase where there's seed investment, the team has come together, you know, we've got the dream, we've got the perceived market opportunity, it sounds great, and the inherent mindset that we see as a challenge is that people want to go from point 1, from the create phase, straight to scale. So 1 to 5. And there's a lot of naivety, we believe, in the startup community of wanting to go from 1 to 5 without having to go through the process of 2, 3, and 4 first. So we have the create phase, we then get into the release phase. Now, as an agency, we've got to take a step back with our clients to say, well, what does the release phase look like? How do we test the market? How do we get feedback from customers? How do we find out what's not working as well as what is working? So often a startup piece of tech or service will be focused on the technology itself, but what about the customer experience? It's absolutely vital in this phase because you're releasing something which is meant to have value, meant to have a clear proposition, it's meant to have a clear solution to a problem, all the things that a good startup should have. How's that been tested? Because there's often we call it refinement. This model calls it morph at stage 3. We call it a refinement process. And that's often a refinement of the brand, the proposition, the messaging, the tone of voice. It's often a refinement of the sales strategy, the marketing strategy. It's often a refinement of the product and service. And all of those things are, you know, what this model calls the valley of death. You know, it's really where you're expending most of the cash. It's where cash flow becomes super tight. It's where you're spending out on all of those elements: brand, marketing, sales, product, IP. You know, you're spending out on all of those areas, and yet you haven't quite got to the model yet. Haven't quite got to what is going to build a sustainable business and what's going to receive the larger funding to get to that scale. So there's a real journey here. The J-curve is such a good illustration, an example of the journey that startups go to over a period of time. What we try and do with our clients is we try and shorten the period between 1 to 4, try and run a lot of test campaigns, a lot of activities that sort of enable 2, 3 and 4 to happen fairly quickly. Having said that, it depends on the size of the business, the size of the audience, the volume of data, the qual and quant data we need to be able to test it and to morph it, to be able to produce a model. But it's amazing the amount of startups we work with that don't have those metrics, those measurements in place. So they're not getting to the stage where at stage 4, you've got a model. You've actually, in a sense, hit ground zero. You've had a concept, you've proven it, now you're at ground zero, ready to scale with the scalability model in place. So I'm sure for each and every one of you that are listening this afternoon, you're at different stages of that curve. Some sign-ups we know are on the scale. We know some are around the modelling phase, and maybe some are on phase 1, 2, and 3. And there's absolutely different principles and practices that needs to be put into place at each stage of that model. And as I said, we could do an hour-long webinar just on that, but we're going to move on because of time, and we're going to look at some customer insights. So over to you, Phil.
So obviously we're as part of this as part of this series, we're speaking to investors. We're trying to find out what their pain points are. We're speaking to some of the scale-ups we've got contact with. Interviewing people, trying to get some insight beyond just the kind of the press release. Something that we have to bring to that as well is obviously our own experience with some of our clients that we've seen scale, that we've seen sort of go through this process. So I've just got 5 very top level, and some of this at first view seems quite 101 stuff, but I think one of the things that we're also finding with customers going through, or clients going through this cycle, is that joining up these components and joining up these kind of challenges is actually what enables them to go from 1 through to 6 on the curve there. So let's just start with brand led. So research shows that you're twice as likely as a business to outperform your competition if you're a brand led business. So I mean, that's pretty obvious stuff these days, but I think one of the things that we find with that is that to be a brand-led business, you've got to always have brand on the agenda. So, when we're talking about brand, what we're talking about is aligning your business, your product, your USP, whatever you want to call it. It's aligning what you've got with customer need and with your marketplace context. So that has always got to be on the agenda. And again, when we're looking at, how do we communicate what our product is, that is a process that continues throughout every phase of the life of a business or a product. So, brand led is obvious, but equally the process of being brand led is a challenge. And, we could talk all day just about that one. But the second one is behavior and insight. So, based on research done on around scale-ups that have failed, startups that have failed, 42% of startups fail because they don't meet a customer need. So, those startups that have got under the skin of their customers are the ones that are able to position their product in a way that meets a particular need. And I think being specific is so important at this point, with that particular thing in mind. Obviously, Tesco showed us years and years ago how powerful, using customer insight is to being specific about meeting needs. And having that as part of your continual strategy, again, is something we see. Those companies that we work with that succeed, we see, that's one of the driving factors. Something specific and relevant to say. So then we have data driven. The number of startups and scale-ups that we speak to that don't even have a CRM in place, or if they have got a CRM in place, it's woefully neglected, and customers are still very much an enigma to them. And so having a data-driven approach where you're gathering and managing your data in a way that actually enables you to deliver deliver and meet customers' expectation, again, is something we see in our different customers that have made this work. We've got a couple of interviews with guys that will really want to talk about that. I mean, I'm thinking Quandu will really want to talk about that one, and they're a business that have really made a success of that step from having a model and now starting to scale it globally. Number 4 is content. So again, we all know that content is king. We all know that essentially every one of us should be a media outlet now. We all know this, but very few brands and startups and scale-ups, or whoever you want to look at, very few of them tell their story clearly. through their content. Very few of them align their story to the customer story. So by that we mean what are the customer's behaviour, what's their experience, what are their pain points, what's motivating them, what are they talking about, how are they, what's their perception of your brand, that customer world aligned to your story is what makes content powerful. And then finally, people and technology, and we call this creatology wonderful, because that combining of a human interaction with the power and the efficiency of technology. I mean, most startups now are around some kind of tech product, but still, that human element is still often the missing gap. I've got a great idea of how I can deliver a particular or meet a particular need, but how do I enable my customers and my target market to actually interact with it and bring it into their lives? Technology becomes most powerful when we stop seeing it as technology, when we start to just see it as part of a function of daily life. So again, we see that in our customer base, where those that are meeting customer expectations by integrating that kind of user experience with the technology are the ones that are kind of able to win in this kind of process. Okay, very aware of time, so we're just going to skip on. But we'll be looking at those kind of themes as we go into this series. Like I say, this isn't just a series about our opinion or our particular view on this. What we're trying to do is actually get real insight and real stories. And interview those that are going through this process, that have succeeded at this process, and that have failed and succeeded at this process.
Yeah, so hopefully that's been a valuable 20 minutes for you guys. As Phil said, we've got a number of interviews coming up. We've got every couple of weeks. If you want to find out more about those, then go to our website at wonderful.co.uk/scale-or-fail. We have got an event coming up next month at Google Campus during London Tech Week on the 12th of June. So the ticket is going fast, but I think there's still a few places left. So if you want to come along and hear from some investors, hear from some scale-up companies, hear from Wonderful, we've got a whole group of us in the room together on the morning of the 12th of June at Google Campus. So sign up to that too. And I think we're done for the day. Hopefully that's been useful for you, as you mentioned earlier on. Any questions or anything you want to send through by email, we're going to have to sign off now because of time. But please email us on dan.mordub@bewonderful.co.uk. Give us a call on our 0207 112 9345. If you want us to share the deck with you, we're more than happy to. And yeah, hopefully you found this valuable. We're going to stop sharing the screen now and end the webinar. And yeah, thank you for your time and thank you for listening. Goodbye.
Thanks, guys. Cheers.